The American-Japanese military alliance has played a crucial role in determining the course of events along the coastline of the China Seas in the last 60 years. The US firmly established itself as the protector of the Pacific region, forcing Beijing to acknowledge Washington's military supremacy in the area. But now, China's military aspirations are growing, and Japan and the US are strengthening their military cooperation as a precautionary measure. We ask a leading military analyst in Japan what lies behind China's strategy.
まず最初に一番中国にとってその喫緊の課題である
I would refer mainly to the problem of Taiwan. China seeks to inhibit the autonomy and independence of Taiwan, using its air force and its navy. In addition, China wants to safeguard its access to military resources. Chinese officials aspire to establish their nation as a stabilising power in the Far East. But this threatens US supremacy in the region. Beijing's military build-up could spell the end to this. With 3.5 million soldiers, China has the largest army in the world, numerically more than twice the size of that of the USA. Thanks to an upturn in its economy, China will also be able to increase its military spending over the next few years. The Chinese Navy intends to build 5 Jin-class atomic submarines. They are to be armed with modern nuclear intercontinental missiles, which also be capable of hitting the US. Once China installs this system, at sea and on land, it will be able to respond to a nuclear attack. Chinese military experts themselves admit that this Jin submarine will considerably alter the balance of nuclear power. The Chinese have a desperate craving for nuclear power. China should never be occupied again. In addition, reunification with Taiwan is our paramount objective. During the last decades, American and Japanese armed forces have been operating close to Chinese provinces. Military speaking, this has put considerable heat on Beijing. Washington feels that this rearmament is directed at it. China is increasingly seen as a potential military rival. Therefore, it must be discouraged, says the military analyst Michael Green.
I don't think we're panicked. And I don't think there's deep anxiety, but it's worth watching. And it's something to be focused on, and for a very good reason. The US spends more than the rest of the world combined, but the US has global security obligations and very, very expensive ongoing operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. What we don't want to have happen is the Chinese developing the military capabilities and a change in the balance of power locally in Northeast Asia, and also with their nuclear weapons, so that the PLA could one day go into Hu Jintao or some Chinese leader and say, we believe we can hit Taiwan with missiles to punish them, or we believe we can use military force against a neighbor like India.
Strategic surveillance from space is becoming increasingly relevant militarily. Control of troop movements and crisis areas through satellites, radar, computers and sensors are progressively becoming major factors in the military arena. China is fast catching up. Since the beginning of the year, Beijing has developed its own groundbreaking satellite technology. In theory, it is finally in a situation where it can monitor American observation satellites. European peace campaigners insist that negotiations must start in order to set limits on the spiral of rearmament in the Far East. It is generally known that right now the Americans are more or less against everything when it comes to arms control. That is nothing new. I think for the last 15 years, China has pushed for the banning of anti-satellite weapons in space. This can only be achieved through an international treaty. But the Americans didn't even respond to that. They didn't even think about it. Then, in January, the Chinese launched a weather satellite, which is basically a satellite test, but they keep it a secret. Which is a terrible situation, as this huge piece of metal is just floating in space. But you can also say that it is a nudge aimed towards the West, because, we are also dependent on mobile phones and communication mediums, which we use satellites for. Basically, they are saying, guys, we need to work something out here. Taiwan has the potential of becoming a global hotspot. Around 1,000 Chinese missiles threaten this island. As far as the regime in Beijing is concerned, Taiwan is an integral province of their country, and the dispute over the island is a domestic political issue. Way back in 2005, a high-ranking Chinese general had already warned that a conflict with America could not be excluded, should Washington intervene in the event of a Chinese occupation of Taiwan.
The most preparations for the PRA today, even today, I think are still focused on the coast, across Taiwan island. And I think this is a core issue for China and for PRA, that the main task, the most important task for the PRA to keep the unification of the country.
In Japan, Prime Minister Abe is keeping a wary eye on the question of Taiwan and the rearmament of China. Tokyo responded politically to the dilemma. The government adopted new defence directives, in which for the first time China and North Korea were specifically identified as threats. Together with the USA, Japan is investing millions in the construction of a missile defence shield. The rearmament of Japan is only a matter of time. Even the matter of nuclear arms procurement is now being discussed. Japan has the technical know-how to develop warheads and carrier systems. Until now, Tokyo had been keen to concentrate on the security policy for the region.
日本が核を持つとするならば
Japan would like to be prepared in the event that the American defence shield would not suffice to protect us anymore. The USA, however, would not keep any nuclear weapons there. In addition, as a small island state, Japan would not have any substantial advantages if it were to possess nuclear arms, since a large section of the country could easily be destroyed in retaliation. Japan would thus make itself the prime target of other countries. Our security would be severely jeopardised. However, China is set on strengthening its nuclear weapons in order to adjust to obvious weaknesses with its conventional armed forces. Chinese military strategists are concerned about its nuclear armaments. China owns an estimated 400 nuclear warheads, a mere fraction when compared to those controlled by the US.
What's worrisome is that the Chinese are increasing their military capability to attack Taiwan and their military ability to threaten the United States or Japan should we in some way get involved. And all of that creates new capabilities, new scenarios for which the US and China do not have new ways of doing business. President Bush and Hu Jintao have a very good relationship and manage our bilateral relationship at a political level very well. If we had an actual crisis, we don't have the transparency or the understanding with China or the crisis management experience with China that we developed with the Soviet Union.
Until now, military manoeuvres in China did not particularly alarm the Western world. Now, though, Beijing seems to be set on an arms race that will be very difficult to stop. Unlike Europe, in the Far East there are no arms control mechanisms, nor alliance networks with which peace can be secured.